Three, two, one, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian the Rain Man Lucas. Welcome to RAINMAN'S Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. RAINMAN'S Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. Thanks for tuning in. My guest today is Jim Rickards. Jim is a lawyer. He's an investment advisor. He's an inventor and an economist. And he also is a New York Times bestselling author. Currently has five books to his credit. All of them are dealing in some part with international monetary policy, international financial crises, and anything that kind of combines politics and economics on the global scale. And he's got another book out right now, or coming out shortly, called The New Great Depression, and hopefully we're going to get into that. But before we do, I've been pretty much reading and listening to everything Jim has put out for probably the last 15 years or so, primarily because he's an expert in this field. And he's the type of guy that's been there and done it. In 1998, he was a lead negotiator for long-term capital management with their negotiations with the Federal Reserve Bank. He has consulted with the CIA and other top political officials. And those people want to know what he wants to know, and as do I. So, Jim, thank you very much for joining me. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Brian. Thank you. Great to be with you.
All right. So you were saying that it's the push on right now to get the word out about the book.
Yeah, I always tease people. I say, writing books is hard, but selling them is even harder. And I'm kind of quiet in some ways, but I'm pretty shameless when it comes to promoting the book. But on a serious note, it is great to have the opportunity to be on podcasts like yours. And I have my audience, but to reach a larger audience and reach your audience. Hopefully people will be interested in the book. I have a copy of it right here. It's The New Great Depression, Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. The official release date is next Tuesday, January 12th, but it's a tradition in the publishing industry. The publisher sends a certain number of courtesy copies to the author, which you get them in advance. So I've got a few copies myself, but it'll be out on Tuesday. It's available for pre-order right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Will be in the bookstore shelves on Tuesday. So very exciting.
Excellent. Congratulations. Like I said in the intro, I think the first time I heard about you was in an old, it's now defunct newsletter called Ed Steer Gold and Silver Weekly. And Anybody out there that was like me that really had no idea, Jim has a way of explaining some very complex theories, some complex policies in a way that the layperson can really understand it, and it really gives you a good background about what's going on in the world as it relates to international monetary policy. But getting back to the new book, New Great Depression, it kind of goes into the last year, how that's kind of impacted things, and then moving forward. So give us an idea of what made you decide to write about that.
Well, we were in the thick of the pandemic. Things are actually a little worse right now, believe it or not, but go back to last March, April. We all remember how bad things were in terms of caseloads and fatalities and hospitals being overwhelmed and the economy collapsing, the stock market crash between February and the end of March, down about 32%, which is that's more than a correction, more than a bear market. That qualifies as a crash. So things are pretty bad. And my publisher called me to my agent, and they said, Jim, we have to have a book on this. We have to have it as soon as possible. There's obviously going to be enormous interest. People know what's going on. I mean, they read the headlines, but they don't understand it. They don't know where it's going, et cetera. We think you can write it, and would you want to? I said, sure. And I put together an outline, a proposal, and we talked it through, and then we went from there. So I started writing it in late April, early May. And I'm notorious for being a procrastinator, but not this time. I said to my wife, I said, good news, bad news. The bad news is for the next 30 days, I'm going to be the most antisocial person you ever met. The good news is we'll get a book done because we have to. We were targeting actually getting it out by the middle of July. So we got it done. But then there are actually logistical problems, not with my publisher or with me, but in the printing industry. Well, there are only a few major printers who do these books. One of them went bankrupt. They continued in reorganization, but then there were supply chain problems, just paper and ink, just basic stuff.
Right.
So they pushed it back to October. But what happens, kind of interesting, is the book publishing industry is a little bit like the fashion industry. There's a spring season and a fall season. It's not hard and fast, but that's a rough idea. So spring are your beach books and your summer books and all that, and fall are your Christmas and holiday presents and and some others. So I was always on the fall list. Once we got bumped, we were going to be out in October. The problem is the whole spring list never got published. It got pushed back to the fall. Bookstores were closed. There were just too many supply chain bottlenecks. No one was shopping, and you couldn't get the books anyway. But now you had a mashup because the printers said, "Wait a second, you want us to do the whole fall list and the spring list at the same time? We don't have the capacity." So they started triaging the books. Say, "Well, we'll do this one, but we can't do that one." So then the publishers got together and said, "Well, no, if it's going to be triage, we'll decide what books you should go ahead." And so I think the people on the spring list, their agents and authors probably screamed the loudest because they need the royalty money, and they were waiting 6 months to get paid. But there were also a lot of fall books about the election. 1,000 Reasons Why I Hate Donald Trump and all these books.
Right,
and the point is, those books were going to be irrelevant the day after the election because. Yeah. Before the election, there's political biographies, everybody wants them, but the day after election, who cares? So I was in neither category. I wasn't on the spring list, and I wasn't on the political must-have list. I actually keep away from politics in my books. I talk about the pandemic and the economy throughout the whole book. We'll talk about that. But so I was one of the ones that got bumped to January. Now, I was a little disappointed, but then I said to my publisher, I said, "Okay, here's the deal. If you're going to push me to January, you have to let me rewrite part of this book. I want to freshen it up. I want to take into account things that happened over the summer, how the lockdown failed, the reopening failed, the disease was spreading, and even to the point that the president and the first lady got COVID-19. There's a human story there, but I said, it proves that lockdowns don't work. I've been to the White House a number of times on official business. It's about the most locked down place you can think of.
Right,
so
right.
I said, the virus goes where it wants. That's why these lockdowns don't work. So I got bumped, but things have a way of working out. And what I mean by that is, one of the things you could say was, well, gee, what if the pandemic was over? And what if the caseload was dropping sharply? And what if the economy was coming back in a strong V-shaped recovery, down fast, up fast, and it was all good by January? Who would, other than historical interest or maybe curiosity, why would you care about this book? None of those things are true. In fact, the economy is not recovered. The economy is getting worse. We're in a new recession now, and the pandemic is worse. So in a unforeseen or unintended way, the book is more timely, more urgent right now than it would have been in October. And I had the ability to freshen it up. So when the reader gets it, in the coming days, it's going to hit them right between the eyes. It's going to be very timely. So through all these, again, we all suffer through supply chain difficulties, disruption and delays and all that. And we've all had, personal, had to deal with lockdowns and quarantines and so we've all been through it. No one's immune. But just as a writer working with publishers and printers, we've had this roller coaster, but it's turning out that the book is more urgent than ever. And it's getting a very good reception so far.
Yeah, good. Did you find when you were doing that, and that was actually going to be my question, you kind of partially answered it. You're basically writing this thing on the fly. I mean, you're reacting to things that are happening. Did that change a lot of the sort of the base kind of outlines and points that you wanted to get across as things were changing? I mean, how difficult was it to keep up with everything?
It was very challenging, and I had this discussion with my editor, the top editor, my publisher at the beginning. She said, "Look, Jim, we got a pandemic and I'm not sure she used the word depression, maybe she did, but obviously an economic crisis of some kind." She said, "We love you on the economy. You're great on the economy, macroeconomics and monetary policy. So write on the economy, but don't write about the disease because you're not a doctor or epidemiologist or whatever." And I said, "Time out." I said, "That's like asking me to write about property damage in New Orleans in 2005 and not mention Hurricane Katrina." I said, "You can't do that. We have to talk about the pandemic because otherwise your understanding of the economy makes no sense." The two things are here's the pandemic, here's the economy. They're very closely linked. And I teased her a little bit. I said, well, I did go to Johns Hopkins, so I'm not intimidated by I'm not a doctor, but I'm not intimidated by natural science because I went to Johns Hopkins, as did you. So that's to our credit, I think. But what I did do is I said, look, science is accessible. I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't pretend to be, but I can read a scientific paper and I can read, and get access to that. It's all online. And I did. I read over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers from the top journals, Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Association. It's all out there. Yeah. And if you're willing to, tackle a few unfamiliar buzzwords, you can get a very good grasp on it without being an epidemiologist yourself. But when I started, it was kind of interesting because I said, well, it'll be hard work, but I know how to do this. There's going to be a bunch of fringe theories and crazy theories and conspiracy theories over here, and there's going to be a bunch of good science over here, and all I have to do is discard this and stick to the good science, which seems straightforward. What I discovered, I did do that, I discarded this, but when I got into the science, I found that the scientists didn't agree with each other. And that was challenging because I can show you a PhD peer-reviewed paper that says, you're a fool if you go out without a mask. You must wear a mask. You have to, et cetera, et cetera. I can find another one, again, PhD level, that says, masks don't work. The virus is actually smaller than the weave of the mask. Most of them are not constructed properly. Most people don't wear them properly. And unless you're sneezing and coughing, and by the way, if you're sneezing and coughing, stay home. It's not about the mask. It's about what are you doing outside. But that aside, if you're in an operating room, fine. But basically, masks don't work. So again, without taking sides, I presented both sides. I said, well, here's one paper that says this, and here's another paper that says that. You make up your mind. But I was making a deeper point, which is that the public is losing trust in what the authorities and the scientists were saying because they don't agree themselves. And whenever you hear anybody, any party, politicians say, listen to the scientists, let's do what the scientists say. They know nothing about science, because if you do know anything about science, the scientists don't agree. They dispute each other all the time. Einstein didn't think that Newton had the last word. Niels Bohr didn't think that Einstein had the last word, and that debate's still going on. My point is, real scientists, or actually the good ones, are pretty humble. They may publish a paper in State of View, but if you come up with contrary evidence or an experiment that doesn't validate what you said, the good scientists will say, you're right. I got this wrong. Let me revise it. And that's how science evolves. It's not, but this politicization of science, where you wrap yourself in a science blanket and make some categorical demand on society, when in fact there are plenty of scientists who disagree. That's phony. And again, it all eroded public trust. That's why people aren't listening, because all this has been abused.
Yeah, and with that being said, Biden has already said, I'm going to trust the scientists. If they tell me to do it, I'm shutting it down again. It's just there's too much out. There's too much conflicting information, like you said.
And that's code for I have an agenda, and I'm going to use science to leverage it. But again, a real scientist would never say that.
Yeah, and you kind of get into a little bit. You bring up Krugman at one point in the book, and he's an economist. He's not a scientist, but I think the point holds is that once they start actually believing their own hype, they get into that rut that whatever anybody says that's counter to that, they're wrong. And
I said in the book, I said Krugman did some great work in the 1990s on development economics, and he deserves his Nobel Prize. But in 2000, he morphed into a columnist, and he's been wrong about everything ever since. So it's almost like the good Krugman and the bad Krugman. Yeah. But just so to deal with that, again, I was reading all these papers and getting as much learning as I could, as fast as I could. You're right. I would write 3 or 4 hours during the day, and then at night I would read for 3 or 4 hours, and that would be the foundation for the next day's writing. And we just kept going. But some scientists are a little more outstanding or convincing than others. And I found that D.A. Henderson, now the name's not a household name, but if you're in the world of epidemiology, he's probably the most famous ever. He's the person who led the successful effort to eradicate smallpox. Smallpox is eradicated from the planet Earth. There are no cases, 0, in 6 billion people. The virus exists in a couple of laboratories, one in Atlanta, and the Russians have one, and I'm sure the Chinese have one, separate issue, but there are no cases of smallpox. He eradicated with a team. It was a global effort. They eradicated smallpox. He then received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is our highest civilian honor, the civilian equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. and then became dean of the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University. So you really can't go any higher than D.A. Henderson in terms of credentials, accomplishments, and recognition. He said in 2006, lockdowns don't work. And I have the paper, and I quote it in my book, and I give it's in the endnotes, so anyone can read it themselves. And there's an awful lot, there's an enormous amount of evidence that lockdowns do not work, and they don't. So if you have an island, small island, with a small population, and the only way in or out is by boat, and you block all the harbors, you don't let anybody off the island, you don't let anybody on the island, you know, in those circumstances, a quarantine or lockdown where nobody's going to get sick on that island. That's not the United States of America. Right. We have 330 million people, 50 states, you know, from coast to coast, and from the Arctic Circle to the tropics. You can't do it. I mean, Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan issued an order during the first lockdown last March or April, and she said, okay, big box stores can remain open. They're, quote, essential, but we're going to close the paint and carpet departments. Why? No one knows why, but it's just an example of arbitrary government. But I said, well, fine. If you live in southern Michigan, you want some paint, just drive to Ohio. Yeah. In other words, it didn't work. If Ohio had paint and Michigan didn't, just drive to Ohio. And there are many, many examples like that. But it shows why lockdowns, it's not that they cannot work, it's that they don't work. I mean, if you want to go to full martial law and have half the population armed, keeping an eye on the other half, well, first of all, that wouldn't work either, and we could never accept it in the United States. But that's why they don't work. Lockdowns do not stop the spread of the disease. The virus goes where it wants. But lockdowns are very good at destroying the economy, and that's what we've done. We've imposed immeasurable economic costs, job losses, business destruction of the economy, ripple effects for no gain, because everything you got out of the lockdown. You know, it's the old 90-10 rule. You can get 90% of the benefit at 10% of the cost. Washing your hands makes sense. Social distancing makes sense. Not having large sporting venues makes sense. Mask, debatable, but fine. I'm not going to argue with the greeter at Walmart. If they want a mask, I'll put a mask on. And I have one. I have a nice bandana, like a paisley bandana. I know they don't work, but I wear it. I look like Jesse James or something. But the point being. But the governors, the politicians, don't really care about the science, no matter what they say, but they have to be seen to be doing something. Yeah. So as the disease is spreading, like, well, we're going to lock it down. Doesn't do any good, does destroy the economy. It's just posturing, but that's where we are. But right now, everything I just said is getting worse.
Yeah. And before I jump into that, going back to D.A. Henderson, is the reason why that guy is not all over the television is because he doesn't fit the narrative?
Well, he's dead. Actually, he sadly passed.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Passed away. No, good question. Really, good question. Yeah. Why don't you get someone like that? And Scott Atlas maybe fills that role. Right. I've had it with this guy Fauci. He gets out there. He's an over-the-hill, superannuated bureaucrat. And you know the old saying, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah. Well, if you're an immunologist, everything looks like a lockdown. So, and I fault President Trump. I mean, when you put the group together, the coronavirus group, and I guess Mike Pence was the head of it. You want cognitive diversity. So yeah, give Fauci a seat at the table and Deborah Birx, and that's fine. But bring in some psychologists, some economists, some lawyers, some engineers. Bring in people who from different disciplines, an interdisciplinary approach. Listen to all the voices, and then decide. But what they did, they kind of gave Fauci the keys to the economy. Now Fauci's pretends to disclaim this. He says, well, I'm just an immunologist, I'm not an economist. It's like, yeah, but you're the one who locked down the economy. Right. And he should not have been listened to, and he's been wrong about everything, by the way. He's been on both sides of the mask issue, both sides of the lockdown issue. So he's a swamp creature, and he's a politico. But okay, I guess he has an immunology degree from 50 years ago, but he doesn't really understand what we're talking about, what more serious scientists talk about. So he deserved a seat at the table, but to give him the keys to the economy was, in my view, a world historic blunder.
Yeah, and going back to that, I thought, just as a random person who, I'm in the camp of the cure is going to be a heck of a lot worse than the disease in the long run. I remember some of the early pressers that Trump was doing with all those people on the stage, and Fauci would give his this is the science, blah, blah, blah. And then Trump would be like, hey, yes, it's bad. We know that. We gotta figure out a way to get things going again. So he was, it seemed in my mind, at least he was trying. Obviously
Right.
he didn't, it didn't work. So we shut, and by the way, your first two chapters are amazing. It's a great sort of refresher as to just a timeline of the pandemic itself, and then the shutdown and all the sort of ill-fated policies that were put in place. So chapters 1 and 2 are awesome for that. Let's go now to, okay, here we are. The economy's basically been hammered. Where do we go now? And what's your position on the relief packages that we all hear about?
Right. So chapter 3 really, as you described, Brian, chapter 1 is the spread of the virus, and it did come from a laboratory in Wuhan. I know the wet market theory has been pretty much discredited, but I said that last spring, but more recent evidence backs it up. Chapter 2 talks about the lockdown. Chapter 3 would get into the new Great Depression. But the point is, chapter 2 is a bridge. So here's your disease and here's your depression. How do you get from here to here? Well, that bridge was the lockdown. And as I said, actually, I think in the first sentence, a virus causes a pandemic, but a virus does not cause a depression. We have to do that ourselves. It's our response to the virus, our response to the pandemic, our policy choices that cause the economic depression. So we start there on chapter 3. So we kind of begin with a lot of, some history and what happened to the stock market, and the real catalyst for the stock market decline last February was not what was going on in China, because everyone knew that. And Chinese were lying about the numbers, but there was a sense on Wall Street that, all right, it's a problem in China, but it's contained and they're going to get it under control. It's when it blew up in Italy that the market, that was February 23rd, the market said, oh, wait a second, it's out of China, it's spreading fast, it's growing exponentially. Now we have a global problem. Right. Although Trump, to his credit, saw that in late January, but by late February, the market kind of woke up. Another refutation of the efficient market hypothesis. The market was about a month late, but that's what happened. But then, so the job losses and the change in labor force participation, skyrocketing savings rates, we kind of go through all that. But then in chapter 4, I get to, I think what you're pointing towards, Brian, which is, what about the stimulus? What about the Fed cutting interest rates to zero, printing over $3 trillion of new money, and then the Congress authorizing $3 trillion of spending at the time, and more since. And just to be specific about that, at the beginning of the 2008 global financial crisis, the Fed's balance sheet was about $800 billion. They took it by the end of 2014, they took that to about $4.5 trillion. They walked it back a little bit to the high threes, but then with this new pandemic, they printed $4 trillion of new money and got it up to $7.5 trillion. So that's where they are. They cut interest rates to zero. Over on the fiscal side, we had, for fiscal 20 and fiscal 2021, we had $1 trillion baseline deficit to begin with. So independent of any aid or unemployment benefits or anything else, we were looking at $1 trillion deficits in fiscal 2020, fiscal 2021. So in 2020, they put, there were 3 acts, but they were about $1 trillion each. Right. So they piled $3 trillion on top of it. So you got $4 trillion there. Now we just did another trillion, about 900 billion. And then once the Biden administration is up and running, they've already said they're coming with another, Biden said the 900 billion was a down payment. So they're coming with another trillion, maybe 2. So you're looking at perhaps $7 trillion, counting baseline deficits, special programs, et cetera, of deficit spending. So, okay, so we got $4 trillion of money printing over here and $7 trillion of deficit spending over here. Those are the numbers. Yeah. What's the problem? And the answer is they have no stimulative effect. Don't call them stimulus. That's what I say to people. Is it money printing? Yes. Is it deficit spending? Yes. But it will not stimulate the economy. It will not get us out of this. And I explain why in chapter 4. Just what was done last spring with the $3 trillion at the time, you can think of it as a bridge loan. I mean, remember what people were saying at the time. Larry Kudlow was running around saying, pent-up demand, pent-up demand. Right. I immediately flashed back to 2009, green shoots. Remember green shoots?
Yep.
We never got green shoots. We got brown weeds. But So it's a pent-up demand. So he said, down fast, up fast, V-shaped recovery. And I thought about it. I said, well, my wife and I were, locked down just like everyone else. We were out in the country, and normally we go out for dinner on a Friday night. Well, we didn't during the lockdown. I mean, first of all, the restaurants weren't open, but you didn't want to go out anyway.
Right.
But by July, the restaurants had started to reopen, so we went out to dinner on a Friday night. But I didn't order 9 dinners. I ordered 1. I mean, the idea that, okay, I skipped 9 dinners and now I'm out to dinner, I'm going to order 9, that's pent up demand. No, I ordered 1 dinner like I usually do. Those other 9 dinners were permanently lost. That's not going to get recovered. There's no pent up demand for extra dinners. It's still 1 dinner per night. So, and the V shape, went down steeply. It came back. We got a leg of a V, but it was truncated. It didn't go back to where you were. And this also confuses people. So second quarter GDP was down about 31% on an annualized basis. Third quarter GDP was up about 33% on an annualized basis. So people say, well, down 31%, up 33%, you're back where you started. No, that's not the math, because you're working off a lower base. In other words, so if you normalize the economy at, say, 100, so call 2019 output, call it 100% of 2019 output. So down 5% in the first quarter, down 31% in the second quarter, so that's 36%. So now you're down to 64. So the 33% is off the 64, not the 100. Right. So 33% of 64 is about 20, 21. So you're back up to 85. It looks like fourth quarter will be up maybe 8%, give or take. Well, 8% of 85, it's another about 7. So you're back up to 92, but you're still not back to 100. We're not going to get to 2019 levels of output until 2023. And we're not going to get to 2019 levels of jobs until 2025. Best case. That's if nothing else goes wrong.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is.
Yeah, exactly. That's not going to happen in a vacuum. Of course, something's going to happen that's going to impact that. So for a guy like me, what exactly does that mean? Are we talking a just massive unemployment for the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's not going to, a good metaphor is you fall into a 50-foot hole, you climb out 30 feet. Well, nice going, it's good climbing, but you're still 20 feet below where you started.
Yeah.
The 1929 stock market crash, for example, the market between 1929 and 1932, the market crashed 89.2%. So call it 90% for a round number. That's what a real stock market crash looks like. But then ask people, okay, down 90%. When did it get back to the 1929 levels? When did it fully recover? The answer is 1954. Wow. It took 25 years to get back to where it was. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't make money if you bought the low. You could have made money in 1933 and 1934 buying the low. Good luck picking the bottom. Yeah. But it didn't get back to the old highs until 1954. It took 25 years. And a lot of people in 1929 didn't live that long. I mean, don't hold your breath waiting for that. If you're the buy and hold type, it's a long haul. Yeah. So my point is that's what a depression looks like, and that's kind of what we're in today. So, I remember when I grew up in the 50s and 60s. It was a fairly prosperous time in the U.S. economy, and I remember it's kind of and I did not live through the Great Depression, but my parents did, and my grandparents did. So I was raised with a kind of depression mentality, even though it was a prosperous time. And as 9-year-olds, we'd go out with our wagons and we'd go door to door and collect newspapers and tin cans and stuff. We weren't doing it for environmental reasons. Maybe it was good for the environment. We were recycling because you could take the tin and melt it down and build tanks and battleships or whatever. And that didn't change until the late 60s, when the baby boom came of age. And then it was like, hey, rock and roll, party on, credit cards, leverage, et cetera. So it did change, but it took 30 years. And that's the point, that the effects of this will take 30 years to get back to, I wouldn't say normal, but some kind of sustainable path. And the effects will be intergenerational.
Yeah. And we'll hop in here in a second about kind of what are some of your thoughts about what to do about it and how to in every crisis there's opportunities.
Yes.
But one more thing, and it just really, it's sad to see. I mean, you just walk down Encinitas, where I live out here in California. You just walk down the street and you just see the restaurants that are closed up, and you wonder if they're ever coming back. It's a depressing time, figuratively and literally.
Yeah, half of them are not, and that's another thing where I think the White House and Kudlow. I don't want to pick on Larry Kudlow. He's a good guy, but he's got the worst forecasting record of anyone I can think of other than the Fed. But yeah, that was the point. The idea was, okay, the restaurants closed down in March or April, let's say, and then this payroll protection plan came along and it had a lot of money behind it, and the formula was they would lend you 2.5 times your payroll. So tell us what your payroll is. Prove it with a form 941 or whatever. We'll give you 2.5 times. The theory was, but you had to pay it back unless you used it for the intended purpose, in which case the loan would be forgiven. So it was designed, so I'm going to keep my people on the payroll and pay them for 2.5 months. But if you think about it, that was really a bridge loan from April to July. But the a priori assumption was that, well, by July, everything will be okay. The worst of the pandemic will be over. We'll be able to reopen the economy. So we'll give you this 2.5-month bridge loan, keep your people on the payroll, and then reopen in July. Two problems with that. They tried the reopening and it failed. They couldn't reopen. The disease started surging again. It came right back again, and they had to go back to lockdowns, which is where we were. And even if that hadn't been the case, 2.5 months, it helps. I'm not against them doing it. They had to do something, but that only gets you 2.5 months. It doesn't get you 2 years or 5 years down the road. And beside that, the other problem with it was that it didn't, like I say, it was a make good. It was a Band-Aid, but it didn't have the stimulative impact that you wanted. And what are you going to do? Do it again? Well, actually, they did. They just did it again last week. But if it didn't fix the problem the first time, it's not going to fix it the second time. You can spend the money and you can help people, but you're not getting the growth. You're not getting the economy back on track.
And what makes me nervous is, especially what you said earlier, that Biden's already alluded to the fact that they're probably going to do another one, and who knows? And
no doubt about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you think about that, then I would assume in those packages, all the forbearances for rent forgiveness, mortgage forgiveness, all of those things are going to get pushed down. So basically, you could have a scene in New York City where it's like one of those Chinese ghost cities where there's high rises. Yeah, they're able to pay their mortgage to the bank because the government's giving them the money to do that, but nobody's in them.
Well, we're getting to that point. That's not that much of an overstatement. So kind of just to start with the tenant. So a lot of cities, New York is one of them, but they're not the only one. They've issued orders or statutes or whatever for rent abatement. So you don't have to pay your rent. And furthermore, we're going to have an eviction moratorium. So not only do you not have to pay your rent, but the landlord cannot evict you. Okay, so that's some relief for the tenant. Where does it leave the landlord? I mean, the landlords aren't the bad guys. They have mortgages. So if I'm the landlord and I have a mortgage, if you're not paying me the rent, how can I pay the mortgage? Well, the answer is at some point you can't pay the mortgage. So now the loss falls to the lender, and everyone goes, well, that's the bank. But no, the banks took all the mortgages and bundled them into commercial mortgage-backed securities and sold them to investors. So where's the debt? Well, look in your 401k. I mean, seriously, do you have a REIT or a high-yield commercial debt fund that Morgan Stanley unloaded on you? And many people do. So the point is there are ripple effects from this.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a year to play out. It doesn't, the dominoes are falling, but they're kind of falling in slow motion. So the tenant doesn't pay, then the landlord defaults on the mortgage, then the security goes bad, defaults in effect, and then the loss ends up in your 401k, and you're like, wait a second, what happened there? But this is what's happening in real time. And then just to put a finer point on it, so let's say I'm a fairly big company and I have 10 floors and a Class A skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Well, what did I do last March? I said, work from home. I told everybody work from home. Well, nobody would have done that proactively absent the pandemic. Nobody thought that was a good idea, but it turns out when they did it, it actually works. People were surprised at how well it works. We're all on Zoom and or Skype or whatever platform you choose. So it kind of works. So now they're saying, well, why do I need 10 floors? Maybe I need 2 floors. And I'll have a locker room, like a nice locker room. Won't look like a high school locker room, but it'll be nicely designed. And everyone can keep, an extra laptop and a sport coat or a scarf or whatever in your locker. We'll have some offices, but you'll rent them like a hotel room or something. So you'll call up and say, hey, I need an office 2 days next week. Have some out-of-town clients coming in. Okay, boom, you're done. Here's your number. I show up, go to my locker, get my laptop, go to my office, meet my clients, and then go back and work from home. Well, that model actually works. And then the problem is Okay, but I just went from 10 floors to 2 floors in my example. So what about the landlord? What about the reception area? What about the cleaning crews? What about the maintenance, the food trucks, the restaurants, the lunchtime shopping, all the drinks after work, all the other stuff, public transportation? If you take all of that down 50 to 80%, which is what we're talking about, and it never comes back because everyone's working from home, you're not paying yourself rent, so you've sort of permanently destroyed 50 to 80% of the commercial real estate market and all the ancillary services. There's no V shape there. There's no pent-up demand. You've destroyed it.
Yeah. Wow. Hey, so we're kind of right around that, right around the allotted time, and I definitely want to hit on this because this is obviously kind of the meat and potatoes of your book at the end. It's like, okay, yeah, it's bad, and here's kind of what I foresee in the future,
Right.
over the next 2, 3, 4 years. Now, what are some things that you can kind of talk about that you would propose, or that people could do to kind of maybe
Sure.
take advantage of the opportunities that this crisis is going to be presenting?
Sure. And that was another conversation I had with my editor. She said, Jim, you can't write a book about a pandemic and a depression and not have a happy ending. And what she meant by that is, okay, tell it like it is, but we have to give readers some concrete suggestions, some positive things. And I do. And I'll be glad to go through those quickly. But in the book, I include the story of, most people are familiar with the German Weimar Republic hyperinflation of the early 1920s. That story is very well known. But what some people don't know or haven't heard of, there was a guy whose name was Hugo Stinnes in Germany, and he saw this coming, and he went out and borrowed massive amounts in Reichsmarks, and he took it and he bought hard assets. He bought coal, steel, vessels, railroads, transportation assets, etc. Then the hyperinflation hits. He paid back his debt. I'd like to say pennies on the dollar, but it was 1,000th of a penny on the dollar. Basically, the debt was worthless. He paid it off in nominal terms, but it cost him nothing, and he kept the assets. And he became the richest man in Germany. And I don't speak German, but his nickname in German was Inflationskönig, which means the inflation king. So I tell that story to make a point that even in the worst, most disastrous hyperinflation of any industrialized economy in history, this guy became the richest man in Germany because he saw it coming and made the right moves. So what I say to investors is we're not helpless. This is bad, and I don't pull any punches, but there are a lot of things you can do to, at a minimum, preserve wealth, and if not beyond that, prosper and make, potentially make a lot of money. Yeah. So I start with 10% gold. Gold, in my view, is going to go to $10,000 to $15,000 an ounce over the next 4 or 5 years. But 10%, people always want to put words in your mouth and go, well, Jim Rickards says, sell everything and buy gold. I've never said that. I don't believe that. I don't think that's a good move, but 10% is fine. If I'm wrong, obviously I don't think I'm wrong, but if I'm wrong, you're not going to get hurt with a 10% allocation. If I'm right, you'll make so much money in that it'll actually, in effect, it'll insure or make up the losses that may arise in other parts of your portfolio. I recommend about 10% in U.S. Treasury notes, 10-year Treasury notes. And again, there's smart people like Bill Gross, Jeff Gunlock, Dan Iverson at PIMCO. They say, interest rates are at all-time lows. It's a bond market bubble. Short bonds, don't buy bonds. The rates have nowhere to go but up. Just 30 seconds on bond math because it's counterintuitive. When rates go down, prices go up. Or if rates go up, prices go down. So what they're saying is rates have nowhere to go but up. And so prices are going to go down. Bonds are a good investment. One by one, these guys have been carried out feet first. They're completely wrong. And they're not dumb, but what they missed is that nominal rates are low. That's true. But real rates are not low. The real rate is the nominal rate. That's the rate you see on TV or on your screen, minus inflation. So right now we have the nominal rate's about 1% yield to maturity on 10-year note. Inflation's about 1.5, give or take. So that makes the real rate negative 1/2. Okay. Now in 1980, I borrowed money at 13%. That was my first mortgage on a condo. And my mother cried because her first mortgage was like 2% in the 1950s. So I borrowed money at 13%, but I said, Mom, inflation is 15%, which it was. So my real rate was -2. 13 minus 15 was -2. Plus, I was paying mortgage interest, which is tax deductible, and taxes were 50%. So I was getting a 6.5% tax benefit on the 13% nominal interest. So my after-tax, after inflation, real cost of borrowing was -8%. That's a low real rate. So right now, so today we have -0.5. Nice going. That's not going to stimulate anything. I borrowed, it was -8 approximately. So what that means is that the yield to maturity. So right now we have disinflation. So if you're trying to get a negative rate, where here's the nominal rate, here's inflation, we're trying to get a really negative rate. Well, if inflation's going down, what has to happen to nominal rates? They have to chase the inflation lower to get to the negative real rate. And another little bit of bond math, at lower levels of interest rates, which is what we have, each percentage point decline in the interest rate produces a larger capital gains. Your capital gains are bigger at low levels of rates. It's called convexity. We don't have to get into the math, but that is how it works. And so if rates go from 1% to -1%, that 2 percentage point drop will produce enormous capital gains in 10-year Treasury notes. Pardon me. And a couple other things. I recommend residential real estate. Pardon me. And but people are fleeing, and that's not an overstatement, an exodus from Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and a few other places. Where are they going? They're going to Miami, Nashville, Austin, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Boise, Idaho, and a few other places. So whatever you do, don't buy real estate in the cities that people are fleeing, but buy it in places. Miami's red hot right now. Miami, Nashville, Austin, some of the ones I mentioned. And look at residential real estate. Commercial real estate has not hit bottom. We talked about that a few minutes ago. It's too soon to dip your toe into commercial real estate, maybe early 2022 at the earliest. But residential real estate in the growing areas, yes, it looks very attractive. And then I also recommend a big slug of cash, because it keeps you nimble. If you're the person with cash, like if you give your money to KKR and you change your mind, good luck getting your money back from Henry Kravis. He'll give it to you 7 years, but not now. Yeah. But if you have cash, you're the guy who can be nimble when we get more information and pick your spots.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and this is kind of on a personal level, and then we're at about 40 minutes here. So you got some money, you're kind of waiting for something to kind of shake up, but it hasn't. I mean, I thought even after the election and all the chaos that has happened in the last 2 months, that would impact the market, and yet it's still going straight up.
Yeah, well, there's a complete disjunction or disconnect between the stock market and the economy. Yeah. Now, going back to what we talked about earlier with the lockdowns, pardon me, people say, well, gee, a restaurant has 20 employees, so we lock it down, too bad, but it's only 20 people. No, I mean, people look down their nose at small business, but yeah, maybe one restaurant is 20 people or a nail salon is 10 people. But in the aggregate, small and medium-sized enterprises are 50% of all jobs and 45% of GDP. So the individual units may be small, but in the aggregate, it's half the economy. So when you slam on these lockdowns, you're killing half the economy. Now, what about the S&P 500? Yeah, it's at an all-time high. I get it. The S&P 500 is the S&P 7 because it's a cap-weighted index, which means your market capitalization gives you disproportionate influence on the index. And there are 7 companies, and we know who they are. It's Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, Microsoft, and Tesla. Those 7 stocks are 40% of the market cap of the S&P 500. So, and they are the least affected by the pandemic because they're virtual, online, technology, et cetera. So again, 7 stocks going to the moon, great. And that takes the index with it, and everyone jumps on board with a Vanguard or Fidelity Index Fund or ETF or passive investing, et cetera, et cetera. So you're on this rocket ship. By the way, the other 493 companies in the S&P, they're flat to down. So there's some individuals who are up, but that average is flat to down. Yeah. And half the economy is getting crushed. So don't, now, here's the reality and here's the perception. Sorry, do it the other way. So here's the perception, stock market at all-time high. Here's the reality, you've just sunk half the economy. Reality always wins. Yeah. It always wins, but it can take time. So that gap is going to close, but not right away. I wouldn't go out and short the index. It's like standing in front of a 70-mile-an-hour 18-wheeler saying, hey, could you slow down a little bit? You're just going to get crushed. but I'm not buying into it either. Look, there's room for stocks in a portfolio, but what people don't understand diversification. Diversification works. It does what it's supposed to. It increases total return without adding more risk. But people don't know how to diversify. I run into people who say, well, I'm fully diversified. I've got 30 stocks in 10 different sectors. I've got telecommunications and mining and minerals and consumer non-durables. I say, you're not diversified. You may have 30 stocks, but you have one asset class called stocks, and they're going to go up and down together. Yeah. Diversification is treasury notes, gold, cash, some stocks, that's fine. Residential real estate, some alternatives. That's a diversified portfolio. And that's what I talk about in the book.
Yeah. Well, I've got a laundry list of questions, and I'd love to have you back on once you finish your tour of all the interviews for the new book.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much again for your time. So real quick, before we let you go, the new book is The New Great Depression, and right. You can get it on Amazon now, or can you pre-order it, or is that where we are right now? It's not in bookstores yet.
It'll actually be out in bookstores in a couple of days, but if you want to get it right now today, you can pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Then it'll be for sale in bookstores on Tuesday, January 12th.
Okay. And then you also, I've done this in the past, but you also have a paid newsletter as well, the Strategic Intelligence. So if you want to learn more about Jim's philosophies, Jim's theories, their strategies in terms of investing, that's a great source. And Jim, do you have a website that we can pass on to everybody as well?
Well, if people are interested, actually I'm on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @James G Rickards. I use my middle initial G. Rickards is RICKARDS. So @James G Rickards on Twitter, and I'm very active, and new ideas come up, I'll probably put them there.
Perfect. Yeah. What I'd love to talk about next time, and maybe this would be a nice teaser, is I want to get into the kind of the big picture, what China's doing, how that's going to impact us down the road. So someday we'll hopefully get that on the books. But in the meantime, this is Jim Rickards, best-selling author, new book coming out called The New Great Depression. Jim, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Hey, guys, I'll finish off by saying, if you're in the military, the police departments, fire departments, the first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. We really appreciate everything you do. Jim Rickards, thank you again.
Thanks.
All right. This is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram @RainMan's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.